Most of you probably do already. I'm the director of FishCAST, which is an NSERC Create training program. And I always have to look up, even though I came up with this acronym of FishCAST, I always have to look up what it means. It is short for Fisheries Management and Conservation Careers in Science and Technology. So what that means, this is a 6-year funded training program from NSERC where we help out. It's a co-curricular program. It was designed by a bunch of PIs. Dr. Catherine Fabria is one of the PIs, which means principal investigators on the grant. It's about 11 different principal investigators over 6 different universities in Canada and Turtle Island. And this is our whole mission, is to try to provide students with added value, our trainees, with added value and hands-on experience to make these connections and networking, and just professional skills and personal skills that are necessary to really become experts in their fields once they've graduated through their own graduate program as well as through FishCAST program. And so trainees do micro-credentials, they attend workshops, diversity workshops, networking workshops, conferences, they attend seminars like this seminar series that we put on by FishCAST. And so we hope that collectively, we're going to be helping you along on your science journey. But not just the science journey, it's so intertwined with your personal journey to become the best humanist as possible, because good humans are good researchers too. But having said that, we also, FishCAST recognizes that what is deemed to be research impact and excellence, the narrative has been changing. And we recognize that because it has so many historical biases associated with the notions of what excellence is. And so we take this, and thank you to Kat for helping us to come to this, is this kindness and science approach, which is to establish a scientific community like ourselves that are that's built on diversity, respect, and well-being. And to this end, this is why we're so committed and engaging in this debate and notions of research excellence and impact through a multidimensional, intersectional lens that tries to combine justice, equity, access, inclusion, and indigeneity. So with that as our mission statement, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Roland Eveleens, but that introduction is the most I'm going to say, because I really do want to turn it over to Dr. Catherine Fabria, who knows Roland so much better, and she's so excited that she could be here to introduce Roland. And I welcome all of you to our FishCAST Fall 2024 seminar series. I hope you really enjoy it. I know I have since we started this. So, merci. Thank you, everyone. Chimagwech.
Thank you. Ani Buju, Catherine Indishnikos, Philippines, and Dunjiba, Windsor, and Doe. I also wanted to say Tanakoto to Roland, who is sitting in Aotearoa. I'm so grateful to be here. I'm just so excited to be here to bear witness to our alumni series, which for FishCAST is such a badge of honor to say that we've had the privilege to create a program where the next generation of fisheries and aquatic science trainees have gone on to choose and pursue a career in their path that honors a lot of the gifts and opportunities and networking and training that we were able to be a small part of. So I sit here in the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations, the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi, and it's a privilege to host the Healthy Headwaters Lab. And that's one of the ways that I got to know Roland. I'm so pleased to introduce you to Roland and reintroduce you to those who've known him. Originally from Otautahi Christchurch in Aotearoa, New Zealand, Roland started his journey in freshwater science, studying biology at the University of Canterbury, working as a research assistant in the Canterbury Agricultural Stream Restoration Experiment called CAREX. And that's where I first met Roland as a young student, really passionate even then about wanting to use science to make a difference in this planet, and having a really deep and rich connection to the places that we were working with and where he is from. And as an undergrad, he worked as an environmental monitoring technician for a regional council before heading to Turtle Island and coming to Canada to complete a master's degree at GLIER, or the Great Lakes Institute, in environmental research, earning a degree in environmental science, and was the inaugural Healthy Headwaters Lab graduate student. And in that work, he was really just pivotal in starting a whole research program on freshwater mussels, looking at the connections between mussels and invertebrate communities and the watershed. And so he really got to know and help initiate a field program for us in Southwestern Ontario that I'm forever grateful for. And all in the middle of a pandemic, no less. So after he graduated in 2021, it was such a joy and a privilege to know that he was able to return back to Cawthron Institute, Aotearoa's largest independent research organization with some of the country's best research scientists. And he works on a large range of projects that focus on stream ecosystems, freshwater ecosystem health. And I hear is doing so well. A lot of my colleagues who continue to work there really just constantly are effusive about how much of a meaningful team member he has been to that work. So I do want to thank Tina for highlighting kindness in science. It was as an early career researcher myself in Aotearoa, where I was mentored by and with other scientists who really believed in the responsibility that we all have to use science in a good way. And supporting early career researchers is how I feel responsible to help bridge us towards a more equitable, inclusive, and just future. So I was an early career researcher myself, starting a lab, and I couldn't, again, be more grateful for places like FishCAST and students like Roland who were willing to take a risk and do this really hard work to make science more relational. Both of us were both new to Turtle Island when we started the lab, so it's just really such a privilege to know that Roland had worked in a place and in a context where being a treaty partner was important, even in the science that we do, and that we all have that responsibility. So I just wanted to say thank you, Roland. The relationships we built are still here in FishCAST. It's wonderful to see our partners at DFO, as well as St. Clair Conservation Authority and Pekajunong. All of those relationships started with you and your project, and I really hope that the FishCAST students now see you as a star in their constellation, and I'm grateful to be here. So it's a story of there and back again, a true Hobbit story in Aotearoa style. But so what we can expect now is about a 30-minute talk. I'll stop talking and really listen with a huge smile on my face. And after that point, FishCAST trainees, we sort of exit and leave it to you to talk to the speaker for the remaining time. So without further ado, I share the floor, give it over to Roland, and welcome you with big open arms. Miigwech.
Awesome. Thanks, Kate. Yeah, really kind introduction. So I appreciate your words there. I'll pull up share my screen, I think. Hold up. I might need Kendra, need you to jump in here to let me share. Cool. Yeah.
There we go. You should be able to share now. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Cool. Is someone able to let me know if you're seeing my slides there?
Yep. Perfect on our end.
Awesome. Thank you. Kia ora koutou. Hello, everyone. Yeah, it's really cool to be here today to reconnect back to the FishCAST program and share a little bit of my story. And as Catherine already picked up, it was just too good an opportunity, this talk, to use a movie title from New Zealand that features some of our awesome landscapes. So the unexpected journal title is a little bit of false advertising, because while as you'll hear, there are a few twists along the way through my graduate student journey. As I think for all of us, that journey into science, there's a combination of some very intentional choices, a few making the most of opportunities along the way, and then a few unexpected pieces to go in there. So today I'll talk to a little bit about my own journey, from New Zealand to working on freshwater mussels in Canada, and back to now working as a freshwater scientist in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And it's much like this beautiful braided river in the background here there's lots of threads that have continued sort of through the journey and woven together. to get me to where I am now. And then as for all of us, it's an ongoing career. So yeah, just hopefully trying to share some things that I've picked up along the way, and yeah, hopefully that's something useful for all of you in there today. And so yeah, I'll talk to a little bit of where I've come from, what my graduate student experience looked like, what I do now, a few things really useful along the way, and then a little bit about decolonizing science as an early career researcher. And then we'll have, yeah, plenty of time for some questions and discussion at the end as well. And so, yeah, all started for me in Christchurch, New Zealand, where I did my undergrad at the University of Canterbury, looking at biology. And so it was really fortunate there to be working in have the chance to work in a really strong research group there, the freshwater ecology research group, which that was where I met Catherine. And yeah, so I went into there doing an undergrad thesis with sort of the plan at the time was thinking about sort of going through and continuing on to a PhD and into research. But sort of as happens, things change a little bit along the way, and I got to the end of my undergrad thesis sort of going, oh, I want to find out a little bit more about the world outside of uni and wanted a bit of a break. So I was really fortunate that sort of just at that time, the local regional council, so for the parallel in Ontario is the conservation authorities, were looking for an environmental monitoring technician just on a short fixed term contract. They wanted someone for 3 months, and so sort of that fitted well for me, and so I applied and I got the role, and that was really useful to learn a little bit about how environmental monitoring, so both water quality and ecology, was done sort of out in the real world, and so learning things about sort of collecting data, managing databases, maintaining sort of equipment, things like continuous water loggers, and just a whole lot about sort of how to efficiently collect data over where things need to be precise, and also sort of about that logistics of lots of field work. And so I was really lucky that turned from 3 months into a year and a half, and was a really sort of cool exposure into what that sort of a career in regional council might look like. But sort of after a while working there, I sort of realized that I wanted to do a little bit more in science than sort of just going out to monitoring the same routine spots every month. And so sort of during that time, I'd kept an eye out on sort of graduate study opportunities, and kept in touch with Catherine. And I've heard that she had the funding to go back over to Canada and start up the Healthy Headwaters Lab, and so that really sounded like something that excited me. And so we kept talking, and then that came together to go over to Canada and be part of the Healthy Headwaters Lab. And now, originally that would sort of we set out to start as a master's degree, but originally the thinking had been a little bit around a PhD, and we had this plan of start as a master's, recognizing the shift and moving overseas, with the intention of likely turning that into a PhD. But that actually turned out into a really sort of wise move, as I'll get to a little bit later. And then another really sort of fortunate piece of timing, that right around when I was handing in my master's, a job was advertised at Cawthron for a freshwater scientist, and so I was fortunate enough to get that role, and that was a permanent role. So I've been working at the Cawthron Institute now for the last 3 years, and that job title of a freshwater scientist is really lovely and vague, so I'll get to a little bit about what that actually involves shortly. And then alongside that, just in terms of sort of where I've come from and who I am outside of science, so I really enjoy getting out and about, in the environment, things like kayaking, hiking, and trail running. And now I say this both sort of for a couple of reasons. One is that I think, especially sort of when you're studying, and it's really important to have things outside of study just to look after yourself. And I think that's something that you need to push a little. My experience was you need to push a little bit more for that in Canada, but also because it's a big part of my why. Because I really value value the environment and want to look after it, and that's really why I've come into science, and environmental science. And then and then I came specifically into freshwater. Sort of people was a big part of that, and so during my undergrad, I had the opportunity to work on this Canterbury agricultural stream restoration experiment, which was really eye-opening to me about sort of the connections between people and the environment and looking after it, and how freshwaters connect landscapes and people. So here we've got on the left here, this was us taking out an experiment that we'd sort of put in that was both learning about the effects of shade on aquatic plants, but also testing tools to help farmers sort of manage these invasive aquatic plants within their streams crossing through their farms. And sort of through this, also is really sort of obvious that we're facing some really wicked problems of like complex issues where we want to look after our environment, but at the same time, we live on a planet where populations are growing, where sort of needs for resources and things like food security are increasing as well. So we can't just sort of go back to how things were in terms of restoring streams. And so we need a sort of new solutions to address that. And I think those solutions and that thinking is common across the world. And so that was a big part in coming over to Canada. And because while you might think of New Zealand as having some amazing landscapes, while we've also got big landscapes of sort of production farming as well. So while somewhere like Southwest Ontario has their wind turbines and soybeans, New Zealand, we have similar intensive agriculture, particularly dairy. And so we really need sort of new solutions and sort of to challenge our thinking to be able to look after our environment and support human well-being. And so, like in terms of coming up with those new solutions, I was really keen to go overseas and have some experience sort of in other ecosystems to keep learning, and then be able to draw that experience together when it comes to using science to look after our environment. And then another key part of coming to Canada was this fantastic opportunity with the Healthy Headwaters Lab was from working with Catherine in New Zealand. We sort of really knew that we had a lot of similar ideas about wanting to use science to connect to people and place and making a difference and sort of restoring fresh water. And it was really cool to be part of starting a new research group and having that opportunity to think about what we were doing, how we were doing it, and why. Which leads me to freshwater mussels. And so, these are some of the beautiful animals that I've came across in the Sydenham River as part of my fieldwork. And I think initially I came to freshwater mussels sort of as a study group, thinking about how we could work with sort of local conservation authorities and also national authorities or national organisations like the Department of Fisheries and Oceans to share data and use a lot of the existing monitoring effort to find out more about sort of community ecology for informing restoration. But as I found out more about freshwater mussels, it was actually kind of found that they were pretty cool because these guys are all, as you can see, huge variation in size and shape and things, and they're just also they're really sort of quiet achiever of the freshwater world in terms of just doing their thing in the bottom of what can be quite murky rivers like the Sydenham, but also offering up really amazing ecosystem services. So it's sort of something that, yeah, it was really cool to learn about freshwater mussels through the field work and just the ecosystem services they provide for freshwater. And so for my master's, so I looked at community interactions sort of through that lens of how we can think about the community or community ecology to restore freshwater species at risk. And so sort of the two pieces of that, we're looking at the current toolbox for mussel restoration and what we might be able to do for restoring freshwater mussels, sort of thinking about considering sort of habitat restoration or sort of using species interaction to support species at risk. And then the other piece of my master's was more looking at community interactions and the associations of different mussel species and also freshwater macroinvertebrate communities. But this is where the unexpected part comes in, because if we think back to sort of the time 2020, yeah, life changed in a bit of a big way for all of us when COVID came along. So as we all did, sort of we had adjusted our plans and we had a mild moment of panic. I think it was sort of that spring 2020 when all of a sudden all the global borders started closing, and there was a little bit of a conversation. I was like, hang on, do I stick around or is it time to go back to New Zealand? And yeah, luckily we decided to stick around, and we found a way to do a field season. So this picture here is Catherine. It's just prior to our field season. This was a moment that we were like, oh, we might get a field season in, because I'd just been able to go up to London to pick up our brand new bright yellow lab canoe, and that was a really exciting. We're starting to draw the pieces together. This might actually happen, and so yeah, we're able to work well to get a field season done, and then while we were all still working remotely, I ended up going back to New Zealand and finishing writing up my thesis remotely, which was really lucky to be able to do. And I think sort of through all that navigating COVID, I was really, really grateful to have Catherine and a really sort of understanding supervisory team that we were able to adapt it in a way that worked well for me, of that getting in a field season, and also when we got to the end of working remotely to be able to work from New Zealand. And amongst all of that is where FishCAST came in. So my FishCAST sort of experience, I guess, was a little bit different to a lot of you, because sort of FishCAST got funding sort of midstream of my master's, and so there was a lot of alignment with the species at risk sort of theme of FishCAST. And so sort of as part of I guess my internship for FishCAST, was working really closely with St Clair Conservation Authority and the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, sort of as we already were for my project, of thinking about sort of collaborating about data collection, and then also sort of another part of it outside is the freshwater mussel work I was doing for St Clair Conservation. I also did a bit of work designing sort of best management practice fact sheets for land managers and landowners. And now that both of those were really useful in sort of developing those skills of working with organizations and just broadening out sort of what I was looking at through my thesis, because sort of that collaboration of data collection really drove some good thinking and learning for me about how to design monitoring, because sort of if you're just doing field work for your own research project, you have that luxury of being really focused, while if you're collaborating on data collection, you have to think a lot more broadly about how you design your monitoring program, so your selection of sites, the types of data you're collecting, and it challenges you to think a lot more about sort of the trade-offs of sort of continuation of previous monitoring, and what questions the data might be used to ask, and then sort of work outside my own project of those best management practice field sheets, and working a little bit more with sort of land management advisors from St Clair Conservation Authority was really to think more a little bit about that connection of how the research on freshwater mussels fitted in with that broader picture of sustainable land management for the Sydenham River catchment that I was working in. And so those both were really useful skills as being a well-rounded scientist that was, I think, really useful and probably helped me stand out when I came to applying for this role at the Coolfront Institute. So the Coolfront Institute sort of is a little bit unique, or is unique in New Zealand, and probably a little bit globally, because we're a non-profit organisation, and we're the largest independent research organisation in New Zealand, and it exists because there was a bequest from from a rich person, Sir Thomas Coolfront, 100 years ago, who, when he passed away, left his fortune to establishing a research institution for the benefit of the city of Nelson and New Zealand. And so, that's been able to really grow over time, from starting quite small to we're now around about 300 staff, and we do work from government-funded research through to working with industry and also commercial consultancy. And as an organisation, we span from working on freshwater and marine ecosystems to social science, aquaculture, and also blue technology. And so my role in that is a freshwater scientist, and so mostly that means doing sort of commercial work and consultancy. So that's doing a whole range of things, as a few of these photos speak to. And so by commercial science, I mean science where basically someone, either a business or a local government or a department from central government, has come to us and sort of we've got a question or a science need that we need advice on, basically. And so some of the projects kind of on here, starting up from that tree left, was some work for the Department of Conservation, which manages New Zealand's conservation lands, where they wanted to monitor the freshwater, so particularly freshwater rivers on the conservation estate. And so they came to Coolfront to design a representative monitoring program, and to carry out the first part of that first season of that monitoring program, monitoring sort of rivers across the country. This digger across Moving Right is some much more local work, where we was the local council in Nelson is doing a lot of sort of flood protection works in the stream, and as a part of their permissions for doing that work, they need ecological advice to sort of advise them on best practice for minimising the effects on fish, and minimising the sort of impact of sediment released during in-stream works. And then sort of electric fishing further down is some industry research I'm involved in. So, and the part of the country that I live in, there's a lot of forestry that goes on, and now sort of associated with particularly clear felling, there's lots of issues with sediment release. And so the forestry company that we're working with is really trying to improve sort of how they minimize sediment runoff from post-harvest, and so they've engaged us to do some research on the sort of the ecological impact of a few different mitigation sort of options they're trying. I also do a little bit of macroinvertebrate taxonomy, identifying sort of macroinvertebrates and processing macroinvertebrate samples, and then a variety of other monitoring roles, and then this piece of policy in the middle here, the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management, has also particularly lately been a big provider of work, because it's a national sort of policy guidance for different regions to sort of improve standards for freshwater, and so we have a lot of regional councils sort of coming to Cawthron wanting advice on how to implement these standards, and how their sort of current rules for land use, how well they match up with this new sort of national freshwater guidance, to help them implement these policy rules. And so, as you can see from this, I'm very much a generalist. So my work spans from sort of freshwater habitats, macrovertebrates, and fish. Although I also have a little bit of dabbling in social science. So I've just been involved in a couple of recently submitted papers that have very social lenses. Sort of one about transforming environmental monitoring and linking it to sort of indigenous knowledge, and then also another piece about rethinking permissions for translocating freshwater fish in New Zealand, and as that develops into more of a restoration tool for our native species. And then one point that I'd sort of like to just highlight as well is that in the sort of freshwater ecosystems team that I work in, I'm the only one on the team without a PhD, sort of our scientists, which, I guess, has been interesting, and I think it comes with a few limitations in terms of the opportunities I have to lead research, but that's sort of not something that's a huge issue for me, because I sort of, I really enjoy working as a team, and having a supporting role is something that I really enjoy, because sort of with setting out to do collaborative research rather than lead my own. But just because also, though, I found as a graduate student, it's really hard to know what that is, how different degrees match up to career opportunities. Because sort of you can see in academia that if you want to really go down a academic research route, you do need a PhD. But if you want to go out into other research roles, it's really about as clear as mud is what opportunities having a master's or having a PhD will open up, and and it's quite unclear when that will hold you back. So sort of from my own experience, I think you can really have the opportunities to do a lot of science with a master's, but then when it comes to sort of applying for your own research funding and leading research, that's really when having a PhD really matters. Although at Cawthron it is really cool. So there are sort of some other members of our team that started out working at Cawthron with just a master's, and then over time have gone back to do a PhD as part of funded research projects. And so that's something that you don't quite have to commit now to deciding how far you're going to go with study before you go out and sort of into the workforce, that there's always those opportunities to go back and to continue learning. And so just to reflect on a few things that I found really useful along the way. There's just emphasizing that we're all still learning, and there's lots of different career paths out there. So like these are just a few observations from myself a couple of years down the track of working at Cawthron. So feel free to take them with a grain of salt. But yeah, firstly though, yeah, people really matter. Like, we don't do science by ourselves. A few of the people on here, were part of my, everyone on here was part of my master's program in research and field work, and it was really awesome to have them involved, and that helped me carry out my research. But just from that, sort of going past that, science is a small place, and so all those connections with people really matter and can be really rewarding. I've already talked about how meeting and working with Catherine and during my undergrad degree was the whole reason that I was able to have the opportunity to go over to Canada and do my work on freshwater mussels. Sort of, there's been lots of other connections. For example, so that sort of when I did go back to New Zealand and was finishing up remotely, I was able to reconnect with a few professors at the university that I did my undergrad with, and they were really welcoming and including me in their own research groups, to still have sort of that contact with others while I was writing up. And now sort of working at Corfron, I've ended up working with people from sort of Environment Canterbury, so that regional council that I was a environmental monitoring technician at for a while, and we had a project where we had a few tricky members of the public to deal with, in terms of they were really persistent and sort of asking quite unfair questions, and so it was really useful to sort of have worked with people from that council in the past, in terms of we'd really kind of established a really some strong trust and a really good working relationship before that project. So those were really useful. And then in terms of skills, just a few, I think, skills that are really important. Your technical skills, so your actually ability to do science, and having a few things that you're really good at. And so for me, it's sort of field work is something that I really enjoy and I'm good at, and so kind of having those skills where the people you work with can trust, oh yep, Roland will be able to go out there and get that down well with no issues, and we can just leave him to it. And the other kind of specialist against technical skill that I've practiced a lot is a macroinvertebrate ID in New Zealand. People skills are really useful, and so that includes sort of teamwork and working with others, including building teams for different projects you're working on, of understanding what expertise you have and what expertise you might need sort of input from others to help you with. And then alongside that, I think cultural competency is really important, and I'll come back to that in a little bit. And so kind of meaning about having that as awareness and and sort of knowledge and respect to work well with sort of all groups that you work with, and particularly Indigenous peoples, which is really valuable. And then also, it's not so much a skill as such, but knowing where your work fits in, because sort of working in a variety of sort of commercial projects, we have, so for me, projects where it's all about, some projects where it's all about the ecology, and and so my involvement in the work is really important. But through to other projects where sort of we're involved because there's a sort of a legal requirement for someone to have ecological advice, and so sort of that ecological consideration is only a small part of a much bigger picture, and so that sort of really matters for the scope of what you're doing, and the opportunities where sometimes it's you have a very specific brief that you just have to stick to, and then others there's a lot more opportunity to explore and learn along the way as you discover things. And then one last sort of really useful skill that you start to collect while doing your own research, but something that's, I guess, I've really learned a lot while at Corfron, your project management skills, of your ability to put together budgets, of writing contracts, and knowing what needs to be in a contract and what doesn't, in terms of how you word deliverables and things like that. and even through to sort of structuring these costs and cost agreements, like as to when you might sort of agree on a fixed price for a project versus leaving flexibility and budgets to account for uncertainty, and then to go with that of managing expectations of when you're working with collaborators or clients, of that, how you're sort of clear that over time is, even if a project doesn't go to plan, what sort of your own expectations are and what others' expectations are of the work you're doing. So those are all kind of useful things that have been really helpful to pick up along the way. And then to come back to cultural competency, I think that really connects well, and I want to talk about that a little bit more in terms of that being sort of inclusive with our science and decolonizing science. I was like, while that's a really big topic to unpack, and as a non-Indigenous person, that's something I don't really have the sort of the expertise to really dive into, but just to share a little bit of things that I've learned as an ECR and trying to do my part to decolonizing science and sort of working across both New Zealand and Canada, is that like many of the structural sort of inequalities, inequities, and barriers to inclusion aren't unique, and so there's a lot of overlap, even like between Canada and New Zealand, while the specific contexts have their own situations, and sort of the treaties between governments and Indigenous people differ. There's a lot of the same challenges and sort of processes of working through reconciliation and things like that. And so I just wanted to share a couple of examples from my own work here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, that just to I guess give you some food for thought about how to approach science in terms of being inclusive and working with Indigenous groups, just to hopefully in a way get cut to a little bit of what's practical and where to start in terms of doing our own bit to decolonizing science, even if it's only sort of a small part of it. And so one small project that I've done recently has been a sediment monitoring plan, working with an iwi in the North Island of New Zealand. So the Maori are the Indigenous people of New Zealand, and iwi is sort of the main tribal unit of sort of Maori society. And so for this work, I developed a sediment monitoring plan related to kakahi or kuku. So that's one of the main species of freshwater mussel in New Zealand. So unlike Canada, where there's a real diversity of freshwater mussels, we've only got a few species in New Zealand. And so this project was about developing a sediment monitoring plan for a catchment that was specifically focused on monitoring sediment in relation to the freshwater mussel population, but it fed into a wider iwi environmental monitoring plan or management plan. And the actual monitoring plan itself that we ended up with wasn't really too different to a lot of the general resources out there about how to monitor sediment. And so there were a lot of sort of standard protocols that were included in the monitoring plan, but what really mattered was how we did the work, and especially because so I'm based in the South Island of New Zealand, and this catchment was on the east coast of the North Island, where the rivers are very different. And so while I had a lot of knowledge about sediment monitoring and some knowledge about freshwater mussels, I didn't know a lot about the environmental context. And so it was really important to design the project and plan the budget to be able to go and spend a fair bit of time there in person, both to sort of understand each other's knowledge and also the environment that we're wanting to monitor. And so what that looked like was a couple of visits up there to meet the iwi I was working with in person, to see the river, to spend time along the river together. And so it was really important to have some cultural knowledge there about tikanga, about appropriate cultural protocols as well, because even though it was it's a kind of a project that was sort of a small number of us involved, so it was going up there. When I arrived, they had a pōwhiri, so welcoming ceremony to welcome me into the meeting house, and that was something that we did at kind of just right, kind of last thing in the evening when I was able to arrive there, and so sort of having that knowledge in situations of just the protocol of a welcome onto a meeting house and a lot of those things, and then being able to have the conversations about how about storage of data and how the iwi felt comfortable of storing their data, so that it wasn't misused by others. And so sort of my role in that was providing that advice of how to do the monitoring to detect sort of changes over time and space, and advise on figuring out with them how they were happy to store it, but with me making sure that sort of what we got to was also a way that they could use the data to share back to local councils and so on of what they were seeing. And so those were really important in developing a monitoring plan that was useful for them in looking after freshwater mussels, because these freshwater mussels were a species that they really treasure. And then sort of another piece of work that I wanted to share was rather than working with a specific iwi, was about sort of Indigenous knowledge and sort of approaching working with Indigenous knowledge. And so in New Zealand, we have a number of cultural monitoring frameworks. And so these are frameworks that have been developed by Maori groups that are sort of a set of culturally guided practices that span both sort of environmental monitoring sort of through traditional ecological methods, but also goes beyond that to consider the interconnectedness between both the environment and the human part of that as well. And so it's both tools for iwi to do their own environmental monitoring, but also preserve and revitalize connections with place and with rivers and with waterways. So just as an example, so if we're thinking about monitoring from a biophysical science sense, we have indicators that anyone can go and measure with a bit of knowledge, like what species are present at a site, how many of them are there, things like sedimentation or the presence of contaminants or land use, while attributes that are part of those cultural monitoring frameworks, things like assessing how well values, Maori values are realised, catch information for traditional harvesting, the mauri or the life force of waterways, and also whether cultural practices are maintained. So all those are attributes that need the environment and the ecosystems to be healthy, but they also speak to indigenous connections to those places. And so the project that I was involved in was a sort of a nationally funded project, looking at weaving together approaches for detecting change over time. And that's sort of where I came in with the scientist, Western scientist hat on. And so we conducted a review looking at what monitoring technologies and network designs might facilitate a Maori worldview framed approach to detecting the effects of land management actions on fresh water. And and so coming in as a biophysical scientist, sort of without being an Indigenous person, it was a project that I felt a little bit uncomfortable in making sure that I was sticking to what I knew and not overstepping. And so I've sort of a few things about I was sort of doing that work that we're really careful about, and I was really mindful of, was that kind of the methods and sources of bias really matter, and when you're working with cultural knowledge. And so my piece of the project was a review of published cultural monitoring methods, and so we were very mindful and very clear that that piece of the project was done using a Western science-based approach, and it wasn't the only part of the project, but it was just one thread of many. So we're really upfront about what we're doing, why and how. And I think because sort of in this example, sort of reviewing published cultural monitoring methods, there's a whole lot we would miss because it just wasn't out there publicly available, because iwi were storing their knowledge for their own use and not wanting it out there. And so we could talk a little bit to what was publicly shared, and then there were other parts of the project that did things like sort of conducting interviews with traditional ecological knowledge practitioners and so on, that also fed into this. And so yeah, well, it took a little bit of thought to design our approach so that was somewhere where we got to of those many threads feeding in to our own project. And so kind of with part of shaping that approach, it was really important for both us to be really mindful of how we're approaching it, and also check approach with people who are experts on cultural knowledge. And I've got that asterisk there because there's a big caveat there of assembling your research team, because when you're seeking sort of advice and knowledge from others, just that really big importance of making sure that you're appropriately recognizing and sort of crediting those involved in your work. And so yeah, that's another project sort of where I've overlapped with Indigenous knowledge. And so yes, a lot of you will already be aware of some of the starting points of decolonizing science and working with Indigenous groups and Indigenous knowledge, but just a kind of few general starting points of it's really important to know where you're working and respect knowledge and connection to place. And so that includes upfront conversations about sharing and storing information. It also is really important about recognizing the depth of connections to places. For example, if you're sort of introducing yourself and your connections to places, there's quite a connection to the Waimakariri river. So that was that braided river that I had on my title slide. But it's nowhere near the depth of connection that sort of Ngāi Tahu, so that the iwi for that part of New Zealand has, because they have a connection with that place that goes back sort of through to their ancestors, while my connection to that place is only recent. And so while I might acknowledge that I feel a connection to that river and I've learned a lot from working there, it's I would also acknowledge that that's something only recent. And then another sort of big point to know is to know the limits of your expertise, sort of, because we're not setting out as scientists to have all the answers. That yeah, so we're coming into working with others where we're providing some expertise of, like my first example about sediment monitoring, and that's where I can provide input and sort of as scientists. And yeah, we can speak to being aware of other connections, but like sort of knowing what we know. I guess for example, with those mussels, I guess speaking to that, I can speak to that. I recognize the importance of those mussels in a cultural sense, but that's what I can't really speak to why they're important, for example. And then I guess just a leaving point that science isn't in a vacuum, because well, for a lot of us, especially studying and working in science, it's sort of our whole world, but often it's only one source of information supporting decisions on values. So to go back to that sediment monitoring plan in that area, there's a whole lot of concern about forestry practices as well, and so monitoring sediment is sort of one part of feeding into a broader conversation about how the iwi there and how the community there sort of want to continue with their rules about forestry. Yeah, so hopefully that just leaves you with some food for thought about how we do science. And I think that's what I've got to share. So hopefully it's been interesting, and I'll stop talking now and hand back over to all of you for any questions. Thank you.
Kia ora, Roland. Miigwech. Thank you so much for sharing. I know, I think we're running up against time for the formal part, and I think we usually pause the recording for questions.
Yeah.
So I'll just look to see if that's the case still. And I'm happy to facilitate the